the next speaker is Nuno Simões Rodrigues with the impact of Tutankhamun's tomb discovery in Agatha Christie's novels and short stories. Nuno Simões Rodrigues is Associate Professor at the University of Lisbon. He holds a PhD in Ancient History Classics. He is a researcher at the Center for History and for Classical Studies of the University of Lisbon and the Center for Classical and Humanistic Studies of the University of Coimbra. He has been dedicated to the study of the cultural history of ancient Greece, myth, religion, and politics, the social and political history of ancient Rome, late Republic, and High Empire, and the reception of classical antiquity in popular culture, especially in cinema. Okay.
Thank you. Muito obrigado, Luís. Good morning. Before I start, I must make a statement, as Professor Luís de Aruz has just said. I am not an Egyptologist, I am a classicist. Well, nobody is perfect. As a classicist, I have done some research in the field of reception studies. When my colleague and friend Rogério Sousa challenged me to present a paper at this conference, I thought that perhaps I could make an approach to ancient Egypt through reception studies, using the same method we use for the study of the reception of classical antiquity in contemporary popular culture. In fact, being a classicist, I am also a historian and philologist, and like most historians and philologists, I like detective novels. As a rule, detectives in novels follow methods that make us identify with them. I am particularly fond of Agatha Christie, so I thought, why not present some reflections on Agatha Christie's work and her relationship with ancient Egypt? Perhaps it is not an absolutely original topic, but there is no doubt about its relevance in the context of the archaeological discovery we are commemorating. Besides, it fits the Egypt Pop Cult project. That's what I decided to do, even if I appeal to the tolerance of the experts in this forum. I decided to include the short summaries of my reflections on the slides so that you can follow my talk more easily. In 1937, Agatha Christie published Death on the Nile. This novel would become one of the most famous of the so-called Duchess of Crime, as attested by the number of languages it has been translated into, the sales figures, and the various adaptations to other media, namely cinema. The book features the Belgian detective Hercule Poirot. The action takes place in Egypt, mostly on the River Nile. On board of a steamer called Karnak is a motley crew of wealthy Europeans and North Americans. It is in this group that a rich American heiress is murdered, spoiler alert, and Hercule Poirot takes over the investigation at the same time as ancient Egypt serves as the setting for the entire plot. The success of the book was immediate. Part of that success is due to the master author who builds a very similar and well-articulated plot. Another part is due to the setting in which the plot takes place. In fact, in 1937, Agatha Christie already knew Egypt relatively well, which allowed her to integrate the story of Death on the Nile into that setting. How did Agatha Christie find Egypt? Christie was born in 1890 into a wealthy upper-middle-class family in Torquay, Devon, and was largely homeschooled. But like many British people of her generation, she took advantage of the potential that the then still British Empire offered her, traveling to many of the territories that were either part of the British Crown or protected by it. Among those was Egypt. Agatha Christie and her mother spent the northern winter of 1907-1908 in the warm climate of Egypt. There she is, riding a donkey. They stayed for 3 months at the Gezira Palace Hotel in Cairo. Christie attended many balls and other social functions. She particularly enjoyed watching amateur polo matches. But while they visited some ancient Egyptian monuments, such as the Great Pyramid of Giza, she did not exhibit the great interest in archaeology and Egyptology that developed in her later years. She herself confesses this in her autobiography. Her interest in archaeology will come shortly afterwards, but still before she marries, her second marriage, the Assyriologist Max Mallowan. Several trips to the Near East, namely to Mesopotamia, and her friendship with the archaeologist Leonard Woolley, I think I misspelled Woolley, I think it's with 2 L's, I'm sorry, Leonard Woolley, and his wife Catherine Woolley, née Keeling, contributed to create her taste for archaeology, antiquities, and ancient history. In fact, it was her taste for archaeology that eventually led her to meeting Max Mallowan and their marriage in 1930. Christie's career, however, had begun years before. In 1916, Agatha Christie published her first novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles. 8 years later, in 1924, Christie publishes a short story entitled The Adventure of the Egyptian Tomb. The story was first published as a part of the book Poirot Investigates in 1924. In this short story, the widow of a famous Egyptologist, who was the archaeologist on the excavation of the tomb of the pharaoh Menher-Ra, together with an American financier, asks for help to Hercule Poirot. Spoiler alert again, both men die within a fortnight of each other, one of heart failure and the other of blood poisoning. A few days later, the nephew of the American financier shot himself, and the press is full of stories of an Egyptian curse. The Egyptologist's son has now gone out to Egypt to continue his father's work, and his mother fears that he will die next. Poirot accepts the challenge and solves what happened to be a murder case. Published just 2 years after Howard Carter's discovery in 1922, it is impossible not to see in this storyline influence from that event and all that was created around it, namely its popular perception that Professor Salzes just referred to, and Susanna, namely its popular perception and what we might call Lord Carnarvon's affair. However, although we know that Agatha Christie had close contacts with several Egyptologists, she never mentions Howard Carter or the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb or even Lord Carnarvon in her autobiography. Even so, it seems to me that the guideline behind the plot of The Adventure of the Egyptian Tomb is, of course, Howard Carter's finding and its popular perception in the 20s. Perhaps Agatha Christie's novel has even contributed to inflating this popular perception. The taste for Egypt and for the environments created around Egypt did not end in 1924. On the contrary, they only began. Throughout her career, Agatha Christie returned to Nilotic settings to create several of her stories, mainly written in the 30s and in the 40s. In 1934, Christie writes another short story, which she titles Death on the Nile. It is an adventure featuring another of her detectives, much less famous than Poirot or Miss Marple, Parker Pyne, which takes place during a trip a group of British people make to Egypt across the Nile. This short story seems to have been a rehearsal for the novel that would be published in 1937 and to which the writer would give the same title. But 1937 is also the year in which Agatha Christie tries out a new genre, theater. One of the first plays she wrote was called Akhenaton. The play is set in ancient Egypt and follows the exploits of the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, his wife Nefertiti, and his successor Tutankhamun, who would take the name Tutankhamun. For the writing of the play, Christie was assisted by the Egyptologist Stephen Glanville, who died in 1956, who was a friend of both her and her husband, Max Mallowan. She also exchanged letters about the play with another Egyptologist, Adon Edwards, who died in 1996. Although written in 1937, the play was not published until 1973, at the time of the Treasures of Tutankhamun exhibition, which ran at the British Museum that year. In her 1977 autobiography, Christie confessed that she never thought that the play would be produced, but that she simply enjoyed writing plays or writing something different from that which she was used to. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was certainly one of the reasons inspiring this play, but also the discovery of Nefertiti's bust in 1912 by German archaeologists. I must say, in fact, this play hasn't been put on stage many times. Here is the picture of one example of a put in stage of the play in the United States, I think 4 years ago. This play is translated into Portuguese, but not in Portugal. It was translated into Portuguese in Brazil. I made a draft of the translation of a Portuguese translation and proposed it to the Portuguese publisher that holds the rights of Agatha Christie's work, but it was a year ago, more or less. But till today, I have no answer about the interest or not in publishing the translation. 1944, during the war, Agatha Christie tries out a new genre within the detective novel. She writes, "Death comes as the end." And with this book, she inaugurated detective stories set in historical periods other than the present day. The plot is set in Thebes during the Middle Kingdom, about 2000 BC. The novel is notable for its very high number of deaths, recalling Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, but also for another reason. Critics have stressed the degree of historical accuracy and verisimilitude to be found in this novel. The suggestion to base the story in ancient Egypt came again from the Egyptologist Stephen Glanville. He also assisted Christie with details of daily household life in Egypt 4,000 years ago. In addition, he made forceful suggestions to Christie to change the ending of the book. This she did, but regretted the fact afterwards, feeling that her unpublished ending was better, as she confesses in her autobiography. The novel is based on real letters translated by Batiscombe Gunn, who died in 1950, from the Egyptian Middle Kingdom period, written by a man called Ekanachte to his family, complaining about their behavior and treatment of his concubine. It is one of only 4 Christie novels to have not received an adaptation of any kind till today, as far as I know, although I have read a notice about its adaptation to be made in short time for TV. Although after Death Comes as the End, Egypt has not returned to the center of Christie's attention as the central setting of a novel or short story, it remains present throughout the author's work. In The Listerdale Mystery, published in 1934, for example, a trip to Egypt changes the life of one of the characters. In Dead Man's Mirror, published in 1937, an eccentric character believes herself to be the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian woman. And in 450 from Paddington, published in 1957, a Miss Marple novel, a body is found in a sarcophagus hidden in a house full of archaeological antiquities, although we are not sure if it is an Egyptian or an Etruscan sarcophagus. Dame Agatha Christie's work is today known and recognized all over the world. Part of the author's success is due, of course, to her detective plots, another part to the settings chosen by Christie. And among these, the archaeological settings, namely those with an Egyptian theme, gain particular prominence. It is therefore not surprising that one of Christie's works most often adapted to cinema has been Death on the Nile, with 3 major adaptations. John Guillermin's in 1978, starring the great Peter Ustinov as Hercule Poirot, Andy Wilson's in 2004, starring David Suchet as Poirot, and recently Kenneth Branagh's in 2022, starring Branagh himself as the Belgian detective. In all these productions, I must say, Death on the Nile of 1978 has a beautiful music of the Italian composer Nino Rota. Every time an Egyptologist calls me, my cell phone plays it. It's a fact. In all these productions, Egypt's sets are always one of the attractions and reason of the success. And behind all this success, we cannot fail to appreciate the discovery made by Howard Carter in 1922. These are some reflections on the topic I have chosen for this conference. Still incipient, but aiming at further development. It should be noted, however, that some important studies have already been done in this field, namely on Agatha Christie's Egyptian sources and the writer's relationship with archaeology. This, however, more from an Assyrian perspective, given Christian's relationship with the Hulis and her marriage to Max Mellowan. Thank you for your attention. I forgot to put the credits of the photos, but I have them here if you want to know. Thank you.
Thank you so much.